Welcome to the CoNNect community, where curation meets science. We are honored to welcome Dr. Allison Justice, who brought powerful insight into the science of smokability. We're diving deep into what truly defines a premium smoking experience. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about fire weed, it's about understanding why it's fire. From aroma and flavor translation to smoothness, we explored both qualitative vibes and quantitative validation, bridging the gap between how it smells, how it tastes, and how it hits. We unpacked water activity, cultivation inputs, and the myths around white ash, pushing the boundaries of what makes flower truly exceptional. The research by Dr. Justice is lighting the path for collaboration between scientists and curators alike. From a cultivator's perspective, these are the deep conversations we get super excited about. Everyone has their own recipe, and every chef has their own touch. Welcome to the CoNNect, Science of Flavors and Smokability.
SacTown was popping. Welcome back to Indoor and Hydro. We've got a very special event tonight. We got two panels. This is a topic that we are extremely excited to get diving into. One of the best parts about all of the Synganic movement and all the different cultivation panels discussions we've had over the years has always led to this part, the smokability, the science of smokability, the post-processing. This is a multi-stage discussion, but we're gonna be doing this a little bit unorthodox rather than just blowing through a bunch of presentation slides and really diving into the minutia of the science, because it's a dense topic. I think we all know that there's a lot to uncover here, but we're gonna start off with a really cool perspective from the curators, right? The people that we know have a palate and the trusted and understanding of what their process looks like, tied in with some scientific methodology around the curation and what the quantifications of those might be. So without further ado, let's do some panel introduction. Personally, I'm extremely honored to have you flying all the way out from South Carolina. Dr. Allison Justice, thank you so much for coming out here. The queen of Synganics, the queen of all of this awesome stuff with water activity. You are an absolute authority in this industry, so thank you for coming out here to share your knowledge and education with us.
I am honored and very, very happy to be out here and see what you've been doing, and this is just an amazing community that's, nice and just sharing information. It's absolutely beautiful to see.
We're honored to have you. Thank you. Mr. JP Murphy, Good Pizza Podcast, an amazing talent out here in Sacramento, really crushing. JP, you have a massive network, a massive understanding, a massive just understanding of curation and what good smoke is. So again, you've seen a ton, you've gone through a lot of this options. Thank you for being up here, man, because I know this is one of those moments where it's like, how do we start to incorporate more of the culture? You're a voice of the culture, and we respect the fuck out of you, so thank you for being here, man. Appreciate you.
Thanks for having me, bro.
And Mr. Marcos Sorita, CGO, my dude.
What's going on?
Appreciate you being up here, man. National Hash Hole Day, founder. I mean, bro, the list goes on out here in Sacramento. You're a legend, bro. Like, there's a lot that's happening here, and especially when it comes down to quality smoke, the curator, right? You got to be very picky about what goes into those joints and those hand rolls in particularly. So appreciate you being out here, man.
Definitely. We appreciate you inviting us out here onto this panel today.
Awesome. Thank you, man. And from Aroya and Aqualab, we have Daniel Anglin. Thank you so much for coming out, brother. You have amazing talent and perspective on the Aqualab. This is a tool that we want to get more awareness around because it's widely used in the traditional agriculture and food and all these different industries. We need more awareness around it in cannabis. What are we trying to do? We're trying to repeat good experiences. This is plant medicine. At the end of the day, we want that experience to tie along with it. So the water activity measurements, we use this daily at Powerhouse. This is one of those tools that once you understand what it does and how it's used, you're really starting to dial in genetics and really putting everything together for this. So thank you for coming out and sharing your perspective with us, Daniel.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And I learn just being around all of you with all of your background in this industry. And it's so amazing to be around people who love what they do so much. And I'm excited to bring the perspective we have on water activity in from other industries like food and pharmaceuticals and combine it with the art that you have in the drying and curing process to get that flavor profile you want every time.
Amazing. Let me come over here to the Bluetooth. All right. One more here. Okay, so the topics. If I can get back to the slides, sorry guys. Good. All right, so we're going to go through a couple different things. So the purpose of the panel is to go through about 20, 30 minutes of internal discussion, and then we want to open it right up to Q&A. We absolutely love engaging with the audience, so please feel free, get those questions so we can really start diving in. So we're going to start off with qualitative and quantitative metrics for smoking, measuring harshness. And Dr. Allison, I would love for you to kick us off with that, because I think just understanding what water activity is and how that goes in the process of measuring harshness. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so I've been doing a lot of work. We're calling it the science of smokability. It's a research team with myself being a plant scientist, with Dr. Riley Kirk, Dr. Miyabi Shields being pharmaceutical scientists. So those folks who understand once those cannabinoids hit the lungs, then what? Because we all have our specialties. It's a wide range of everything from breeding clones all the way to it hits your lungs and how it functions in the body, right? It's not just a tomato to where it tastes good and that's the end of the day. So what we wanted to do was put together a study where, we take a few metrics of what's happening, and there's going to be more than my lifetime can handle as far as what needs to be tested and what we need data points around. But I'm here to do what I can do. Our first phase was looking at water activity and how water activity can affect harshness. And that's not the only important thing. Water activity is very important as far as safety, because like you mentioned before, water activity is different than moisture content because it's your safety data point, right? It's that point to where those spores, that bacteria that's there already they're not gonna go away, but they at least won't continue to grow if you're under a certain amount. And so what we wanted to do was look at water activity from 0.45, which is pretty dry, 0.65, which is just about at average, and 0.85, which is very wet, and see what delivery is like from joints that are at those different water activities.
And that's a good range to throw out there, because we all know about the terp block, right? The 0.58 to 58% to 62%. That is essentially in the same range of those water activities, correct? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, honestly, just the day before yesterday, we got our paper accepted into a journal for peer review on water activity. And it has been very interesting what we've found. With higher water activity, it takes a lot longer to smoke the joint, right? Because it's wetter and you're burning at a lower temperature. But it delivers more terpenes, right? So the more water there is, the more terpenes that can come along for the ride into your mouth. And so that's what we've been able to measure with our smoking machine. But the problem is with our smoking machine, watching it. So imagine a robot that smokes a joint. But you have to program that robot to smoke the joint in a certain way. The problem is that software that we have to program the computer to smoke the joint, we have to find data to program it somehow. And that data is from the from cigarettes. And so we use Canada Health to program our smoking machine. Well, very quickly we saw that the smoking machine, chiefed it like crazy, just absolutely, just ripping it. And we're like, this is not okay. Like, this is not accurate. So what you'll see back here in the back by a table, so, between panels, after the panel, please come smoke for me. Because what we want to do is reprogram that computer to smoke like someone that is actually smoking weed. And so that back there, what it's doing is measuring, not only how hard you're pulling, but the duration you're pulling, the stops between. And so then we can take that data, program the computer to then smoke a joint to where we feel it's proper. So it's running the same temperatures and everything else that someone smoking cannabis would achieve.
Amazing. So on the slide that I finally got my Bluetooth working. So moisture content versus water activity, right? So water activity is like the free liquid that the microbes can basically come in to turn into a pathogen. We don't want that.
Exactly. No.
So from a curator's perspective, when you get your nose in the bag and it's got that funky aroma, right? I mean, you guys have curated long enough. You understand what a good pack smells like. So let's talk a little bit about that process of when you get your nose in the bag, maybe there's that funk, that bad funk. JP, talk to you a little bit about that and what you're hearing from Dr. Allison and that correlation.
Yeah, that was dope, by the way. I'm a weed nerd. I'm like all in on what you're talking about. So yeah, as soon as I start smelling the bag, I can tell if it's a little too wet, if it's it hasn't been cured long enough, or it could be getting a little mold, or if it's turning. You know what I mean? That's really what I'm looking for, and terps that I like. And I want it to like punch me in the face. When I open the bag. So that's certainly the first step for me.
Now, we've all seen a pack that's been bagged a little bit too soon, right? The nose is starting to come out, all that water is just evaporating, mold. A lot of these challenges when you start to go through that process. Now, Marcos, when you start looking at it from, when you're breaking down, you can tell on that breakdown if something is too high water activity or the moisture is just way too much. What do you think?
I mean, it's all subjective. Some people like their weed wetter. I definitely don't. Me. When I go put my face in a bag, I'm looking at it like the smell. It's kind of hard to explain how it smells, but it's clean. Doesn't have background noise when you're smelling it, because like people are like, wow, how do you know if it smokes clean? Well, it smells clean. But yeah, for like moisture when breaking down, I'm looking for something that's more not dry technically, but more like a consistency of like being able to snap off of the little stem, because sometimes when you're snapping it off, it's like pulling and it's like ripping it off. That's when it's not right.
For sure. And I'm super glad that you said subjective, because one of the biggest takeaways that we've had with the Aqua Lab was accountability and measurements. You cannot manage without measurement. If we want consistency from a brand perspective, going into different markets, whether it's in this country or outside of this country, you gotta have some sort of metric for that specific genetic. So when we start talking about measurements of water activity, what that specific cultivar should feel like. When you smell it, it smells clean. When you break it down, you know what it feels like. Well, let's measure it. So now every time when it's ready to actually go through, or maybe it's not, maybe it's too dry or maybe it's too wet, you'd be like, just put it in the machine, be like, no, this ain't it. Or maybe if it's you consulting somewhere outside of market, what's the water activity at? It's not ready yet.
Right, no, definitely.
So, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later on the Synganic side of the discussion, because we feel like we have to get much lower in our water activity because it's just so terpy, it's so tacky. That's one of the biggest challenges, but thank you guys for going through that. Now, Daniel, if I can tap into you real quick, because with the Aqua Lab, it is an investment. We have tools that we look at from a cultivation perspective. Now, a lot of the bulk market, there's a lot of rushing through that process, right? And so when you start looking at, you mentioned pharmaceutical industry, the food industry, how was the adoption in that? Obviously, there's legalities around if it's in the unsafe zone. With cannabis, what are the things or what are the challenges that you're seeing to overcome the barrier of using a tool like this?
One of the biggest challenges I see is kind of what you described already, which is that fight between I know I want it this way and it's supposed to feel this way, and that's how it's going to smoke well, versus the people who want to put data to it. And they fight because they think it can't be the same, but I think it can. And it almost has to if you want to scale and get consistency at scale. So that's what I find is that while we make certain recommendations for like the recommendation for water activity should be this, if you find a cultivar that you have to dry down a little bit more to get it to where you want it, do that. Just make sure it gets to that same place every time. And so I think getting that across to people and the fact that that's how they'll make their customers as happy as possible and keep their yields as high as possible at the same time is what's difficult to communicate sometimes.
I have a question for you, ma'am. So two of my favorite cultivators that cultivate for my brand, I won't mention their names, but I believe they're two of the best in town. One, the outside of the bud, it can almost seem dry, but it's nice and sticky inside. It's got some life left, and I find that it's great. It's good to smoke, usually right off the bat. And my other cultivator, he tends to bag it up a little more on the wet side because we all know the chain of the process to get it to the retail, it takes a while. So he wants it to cure as it goes in a grove bag. But sometimes I've had issues with a little mold or, that can get messed up along the way by not being cured all the way because it might not always be in like 65, 70 degree room. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a little risky, right? And I think the water activity meter is where it could come in to help you, right? The grove bags are good at, I'm not going to say you can dry in grove bags, but they're good at stabilizing at a higher water activity than, say, a turkey bag, right? Because a turkey bag, you're going to put it in at 0.6. Depending on how long it sits, it's going to lose moisture. Like, it is not tight, right? It's porous, and it's going to lose. So, I mean, that's a tough one,
Risky is a good answer. We'll go risky.
It's risky. It's risky because, one, are they using a meter to test that every time? And two, one day are they testing a big bud or a little bud by feel? And so you're right, putting it in a bag after that could be very risky as far as those bigger buds growing mold and, maybe the smaller ones being okay and how they sort that.
Sure. Thank you.
I think that's a challenge that many of us face, right? Because we also want to keep the shelf life, right? So if you back it up a little bit on the wetter side, the shelf life, stability.
But that's where tools come into play, right? Your guy takes a big bud and a little bud and he chops it up, he homogenizes it and puts it in the water activity meter, and he's always putting it in the bag at 0.67, for example, and he knows that it's going to be at 0.65. Again, just for example, by time it's sat in a grove bag for a month. So.
Cool.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the, obviously the quantitative measurements that we look at. Water activity is one. Now, how do we measure that though from a curator's perspective, right? Let's say we all don't have 12 or 14 grand to throw down on an aqua lab. What are some indicators that you've seen coming across? Because you've done this before without an aqua lab, so now that you have one, what are some of those factors that cultivators can take away?
Ooh, that's a tough one without an aqua lab. There are some less expensive water activity meters, right? I'm not a water activity meter specialist, so I can't tell you how maybe one less expensive to one more expensive compares in accuracy. From there are ways, scientifically you can figure out the water activity of a plant with just simply a meter that's measuring relative humidity, right? So if you have a bud, you can put it into a jar with a hygrometer in it and leave it for 5 days, and whatever it homogenizes out to is theoretically similar to the water activity. But, if you're actively in a dry, do you have time to leave a bud in a jar for 5 days for you to figure out what that is? Because in that meantime, it's still drying. So that's tough. I mean, when I first got into cannabis, guys were just snapping the stem. And at first I thought that was insane, But as time went on, there is a correlation to that. So, I think for smaller growers, for everyday testing, there is a notion of that there is some snap, there is a feel that you get with the plant to understand when you are at a safe level. Now, on a commercial scale, do I encourage you to behave in that fashion? No, not necessarily. You can pair that with a water activity meter, but, there's always feelings to farming.
For sure.
And that when you're a good grower.
And that's what's cool is you know that you have a process, and now you can actually validate what that process is. And again, this goes back to scaling, right? Because how do you hold somebody accountable for your brand when you start going out into market? It's a measurement tool, right? You can't always be in all locations, but you got to have some sort of baseline. And then there's subjective nature around what that baseline is, up or down. But thank you for covering that. I know that was a tough question to answer. It ultimately got back to the traditional methods that we have, the stem snap. I'm so happy you said that. Okay. So I want to talk about heat, because the machine, when you showed me back there, like you're measuring the tightness, or like if you're what'd you call it, a petite puffer versus a heavy smoker.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So everybody has a different draw. Now, what about temperature? Because this is something that I know we don't ash our doinks, and this is something that keeps the internal combustion temperature lower. So talk a little bit about heat in the combustion.
I'm absolutely fascinated by that, because, though I smoke and though I have my way of smoking, I'm not necessarily in the California culture that's got it figured out. I mean, even though there might not be perfect data behind it, you know quality and you know how it's done and you know it tastes good. So, understanding, you guys know that you leave it to be a long ash because it does this or that. That's something that I don't necessarily comprehend completely, but that's why I think, our worlds working together and understanding that and putting data points behind it is how we grow, where it can be repeated on multiple varieties, multiple sizes, or whatever else.
Marcos,
exactly. Like
definitely.
that's completely fascinating that you have you purposefully do that. That's amazing, and there's a reason behind it, right? There's a reason behind it, and I want to
JP, you want to
figure
let
it
them know a
out.
little bit behind why we do this?
Yeah, it's like cigar tech, it keeps the cherry cooler, and the cherry's cooler, okay, this is not my theory, this is proper doinks theory, so I'm about to nerd out with y'all real
It's
quick.
the bro theory, I feel like.
It's bro science, for sure.
Bro
It's
science,
some
for
bro
sure.
science. So it instead of burning the material, it vaporizes the oil and before it burns the material, and that is where you're getting your good flavor from. Versus, like, for example, if you're smoking a joint outside in the wind, it's gonna burn real hot and spicy. I never knew why that was. I'm like, damn, this just tastes good in my house. This sucks.
Yeah.
And like, because the wind is ripping, it's keeping that cherry way too hot. There's no ash on it, so it's just burning. It's just burning material at
As
that
hot as
point.
it can.
You know?
Yeah.
What about like taking temperatures of the cherry? Have you ever done something like that?
Yeah, so actually that meter back there will measure the
Oh, cool.
temperature, like
That's what's up.
like a half inch before it hits your lips.
And
Yeah.
there's a really cool video that you put out with Dr. Riley Kirk on YouTube that goes over that whole machine process, and it's cool because they captured it at the right moment where the ash did fall off, and then boom, the combustion just lit up, the temperature raised. It was cool.
Doing an IR camera, looking at it, the ash falls in it because it's exposed to more oxygen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fire. I'm excited to go back there and try it.
So there's a little bit of science in there.
Yeah,
Mixed with bro science,
absolutely.
That's the purpose of this panel, honestly, guys. We're trying to mix what the cultural bro science might be with some quantitative measurements. Like, there's definitely some correlation here.
Definitely.
So obviously, I think meshing both of the worlds together is exciting. Like, we're blessed for this conversation. So thank you, guys. Like, we want to dive deep, and we'll get into the Q&A momentarily. But go ahead, Marcos.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of excited because what we do is we kind of like specialize in just like hash holes and donuts, and that's a concentrate inside of the flowers. So that right there, as soon as it gets close to the rosin, the infused part, the temperature tends to rise up a lot more, because rosin burns at a different temperature. So it's pretty cool to see, because I'm like, that's why we usually try to keep the ash on as long as possible. But yeah, no, I'm kind of excited to go back there and try it out.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So guys, let's pause for Q&A. What questions do you guys have? We can keep rocking up here. My man, Bruno, come on up.
Since you've already used this machine, what is the range of the ash heat? So from when there was a large cherry to when there was no cherry, you said that there was a spike. Now, what were those temperatures that you were seeing?
Whew, we did this a while ago. I think it ranged from, yeah.
Definitely going to be finding out soon.
I think it ranged from, the highest was maybe 220 that we saw Fahrenheit, and then down from there, really.
In like the 80s up to 220?
Yeah,
is that the range?
and normal, a light pull being only in the 90s to 100, so much lower than I thought.
I apologize. That can't. That might be the temperature of the smoke. What was the temperature of the ash itself?
The ash. So
Yeah, the cherry.
When it's still on
Yes.
the joint?
Yes. The cherry temperature actually will change. Like you were saying, since the smoke changes,
Yeah.
the ash changes. So what would be like the correct temperature that we should keep the ash at? Because we want to find out, because you don't want it too hot.
Right.
So what is the correct, right before it goes out, temperature of the ash?
I'm going to say the sad thing that I have to always say in science is I don't know yet, but I'm trying to figure that out.
We're going to have to help you.
I mean, that's what it's all about.
you,
Is you guys know what quality is. You guys know how to do it. You know, you know what tastes great, what does right. I'm just here to measure it and verify it for you.
We're excited to be a part of this. I think we got a new pilot program about to stir up.
Bruno, thank you for the question. That's a good one. My man, right up here. The question was, can we do a brief overview of how the machine works?
So it's basically just a flow meter. So ultimately, it's just a multi-directional anemometer in a way that you can hook a joint up to it. And so what we'll do is take 30 to 40 samples of a wide range of people that smoke in different ways, and then we'll put together an average of what a consumer would be from those samples. And so, at that point, we'll know, okay, the average person pulls this hard at first, pulls this long, and then, has this amount of seconds between pulls. And so we'll take that data and plug it into the smoking machine. And then the smoking machine is where we can take that smoke, plug it into the machine, and then we collect the smoke into a solvent. And then so we can say, all right, well, if it's a 1 gram joint that's packed this, this dense or this dense, you're getting actual delivery of a certain amount. Or we could say, all right, well, if it's half infused with hash, you're getting double delivery of cannabinoids. So what this is doing is actually setting it up where the robot can smoke properly to where our data is reliable in the smoking machine.
I have a question regarding circumference or diameter of the actual flower that you're smoking. Does that correlate to harshness or the amount of heat that's pulling through?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Depending, if it's trim, if it's flour, how hard it's packed, if it's hand rolled, every little change changes the delivery as well as the temperature, for sure.
We love to hear it.
I'd like to add on to that. So, do you think there's a minimum of grammage we should be putting in these joints? Like, I personally roll usually a 2.25. So it gets the cherry. The cherry can be big enough to stay lit and burn the joint properly. For me, whereas anything under a 1.5, let's say a gram joint, you might not get the full flavor because the cherry is not combusted. It's burning a lot of paper. It's combusting too hot. Yeah, it's too hot. Yeah.
No, I totally agree and think that could be the case. Okay. But
where you at with it?
Where you at with it? I agree. I think theoretically, I think the bigger ones could be more flavorful, right? But we have to start somewhere. And so I have to standardize it to at least begin getting data. And so for us, we're using a gram cone, right? Freshly rolled material. We try to. But we have to start there because if you're doing a half gram, right, it's gonna be hotter. You've got less way between your mouth and the joint, right? If it's a 2 gram donk or whatever you want to call it. It's bigger.
The 2 gram
it's
doink.
Bigger
2 gram doinks.
Doinks, and there's more space. There's more terps between that you're to be bringing in the pool. So every way is going to have to be studied, but we got to start somewhere.
I completely agree, because that's going to lead to like circumference. Marcos, I know you like the bigger 15 millimeter, or is
Oh no. Well, it just depends, because like right now for our rec market, we're doing anywhere from like 9 mil, 10 mil to 11 mil. Right now we're not really making too big of joints, just based on the fact that consumers don't want to spend a lot of money for just a single joint,
I completely agree, because JB, like you said, like 2.25, like that's minimum, right? To really have the proper, like on an 11 millimeter tip, for me, that's my go-to, and just being able to have that, and like enough of that, it's expensive, right? You can't be smoking like that 2-3 times a day and be an average consumer. It's not tangible, so having a more consistent, smaller tip. But does that change the overall experience?
I feel like it varies, honestly, depending on how much smoke is coming through the actual tip at the time, because it's about delivery. Like she was saying, when you're smoking, the temperature of the joint, whether it's big or small, because we also do hand rolled mini 7.5 joints, and it is a different experience. I'm not gonna lie, So, can't lie. What were we talking about?
Repeat the question.
Tip size, and how that correlates.
Yeah. Don't smoke. Yeah, so when it comes to tip size, definitely, it just varies,
For sure. That's the cool thing. You have to start somewhere. So with the 1 gram cone, we're gonna start, and there's the baseline. So. That's the beauty of science and R&D, right? We got to have a starting point. You cannot manage without measurement. You got to start there. So, this is a great question. Thank you, whoever mentioned that, Jeremy. Thank you. What other questions do you guys have? Yes.
So this is about the science of smokeability, right? So have you noticed a correlation with water activity and terpenes and terpene degradation?
I'm going to repeat the question. So the correlation between water activity and terpenes, and if there's a correlation with degradation of terpenes at higher or lower water activity levels.
Yes. So, what we've noticed is when you're getting down to those lower water activity levels, usually you're pulling water out faster from the plant. And so this is less about the smoking concept, more about what's happening in post-harvest. So if you're pulling out to those really dry, that 0.45, when you're losing that much water, you're also losing a lot of those terpenes that are, the most volatile. So the lighter weight terpenes. So it depends on the condition, but most time, the lower water activity, the lower terpenes, the more terpenes you've lost over time. But, kind of opposite to that, if you are smoking a joint that has a higher water activity, you're delivering more terpenes to your mouth. So the water itself, it becomes steam. You're lighting it, it becomes steam. And I'm not talking about right there at the ember, I'm talking about between, right? Because when you pull from that ember, there's heat coming across, and ultimately your joint becomes a vaporizer in some sections. And so higher water activity, higher moisture content, you're getting a better transfer of terpenes to the lung.
So the question was, is there a sweet spot between the water activity and terps, and where that comes through? Is it genetics? Is it cultivar specific?
Genetics always plays a part. Like, no matter what we're doing, it always plays a part. in a consideration. But we stuck with one variety for these studies, right? Of course, it needs repeated with other varieties because everything's behaves differently. But for us, and keep in mind, we have to. Science is hard because you have to pick a starting point. And so it was 0.45, 0.65, and 0.85. 0.45 delivered very little terpenes through the smoke. 0.85 is dangerous because it's way too high of water activity. You continue to get microbial growth, but you got a lot of terpene transfer. But you got to let that go because it's dangerous. So, being that 0.65 was our only other, treatment there that we were measuring, that would be today what I say as the most terpene transferring water activity. But had we gone to 0.58, it may be just as good. So, little by little, we're kind of honing in on what's safe and what delivers what. But we got a little ways to go.
Go ahead, Daniel.
To be determined.
I was going to say, if I could add to that, the nice thing about water activity is that we know that once you get below 0.65, you're safe. Like, you're not going to get mold. I mean, I think there's a couple of strains of Aspergillus they're finding that are just above 0.62 even. So, but ASTM standards would say 0.55 to 0.65. And so once you get below 0.65, you can go to what you like the best. And I think, Sergio, you even mentioned that you're finding some cultivars where you need to be significantly below that to have the quality that you want. And you will find that cultivar to cultivar, they'll bind water differently. So some will be able to have a higher moisture content and the same water activity as something with the lower moisture content. So you'll have like a really fluffy bud that's 0.6, and you'll have something from a different cultivar that's really dense and hard, and it's 0.6.
That's such a delicate balance because as a cultivator, you're trying to retain as much yield as possible by having that moisture content be close to that 14% by standard, I believe, is the compliance for that. So and then there's a fine balance of where the water activity is just way too high and you're in that danger zone. So again, how do you do that without, going too far?
Well, in moisture, that's why moisture is really hard. No two cannabis labs test it. Well, I won't say no two. Lots of cannabis labs test it different ways. And if you send it to one lab that's heating, they're using an oven, for example, so they put the flower in an oven and they dry it down at 110 degrees Celsius. And then you took the same sample and sent it to a different lab, and they're using an oven at 100 Celsius, they'll get two very different results. Because the one that's cooking it hotter is cooking off more volatiles, and they're going to say your moisture content was higher. But it's the same sample. So moisture is really tough. That's another reason why water activity is really a whole lot easier to standardize.
So would you say that there's some qualifying questions as a cultivator working with the lab? Like, how do we vet these out, or how do we know how to work with the lab to make sure that we're giving them a proper sample at the time?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, when it comes to you sending them the sample, you always want to just have a representative sample for what you're going to deliver to the customer. And I know that can be a little tough. So you want to have a representative sample that you send to them. But when you're if you were to work with a lab, it's a very fair question to ask, what is your testing method? And I see it all the time where they'll change labs and get drastically different results and have bad results that they're unhappy with, and they'd never think to ask the lab, how did you test this first before making a change to their cultivation? So ask them what they did, because if they did all the same things but used an oven at a different temperature, you'll get lower moistures.
Now that's fascinating because, again, it's collaborative, right? A lot of people just get lab remorse. If you get a low result, you're just like, well, I'm not going to work with that lab anymore. Screw this. I'm going to go to the other lab. That's not okay, right? How do you work with them? So thank you for answering that. Just how, now that we know how you test or what your methodologies are, how do we as cultivators then help adjust to whatever their testing methodologies are? Not to skew the numbers, just to, again, retain the flavor and the terps and the moisture along with that water activity.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, it is collaborative. It has to be. We get a lot of people that come to us after being upset because something didn't line up. So testing methodology is incredibly important, as well as what they're using. And that's why, I mean, I work with Aqualab and we do moisture meters and water activity meters. But when it comes to cannabis, like, because there's so many volatiles involved, and every cultivar has a different quantity and different kinds of volatiles, that's why I have to harp on water activity over and over. It's just way easier to read for flower, and way easier to be consistent. And it has a lot more to do with the qualities that you want too. Water activity is, a lot of people, like you mentioned, it's like free water. It's the water that's available. There's more technical definitions for it, but that's a good way to think about it. It's like how much water is being bound by the flower and how much is available to cause enzymes to be more active during your cure. If your water activity is different, enzymes are going to act differently and you'll have a different cure. So water activity is much more directly related to everything you care about than moisture alone.
Now, any questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
So when you guys are looking at a bunch of different paths and selecting for your brands, are you finding any trends where it's like living soil is always the best, or organic's better than salts, or synganics? Are you talking to your growers on that level? Do you see any trends that seem to consistently be making product better?
So the question was, are you guys seeing any trends from salt growers to organic growers to living soil to synganic? What are some of those trends that you guys are seeing that you're correlating that allows you to curate for your brands?
So for my brand, I've been seeing a lot of success with cocoa, house and garden, or cocoa, synganic, but I've also seen great product come out of cubes. I've seen, yeah, I think that's about the realm of where my cultivators are doing it, and it's still batch to batch, but those are the programs pretty much that they're on.
For me, when I'm out there curating different pairings for flower, and I'm working with different cultivators, and we work with different living soil brands, we work with different brands that are working with salts, and so I mean, what I've noticed, with some of our rolls, that sit, sometimes for a few months, and if it's not rolled properly, based on how the flower is, because like we were talking about earlier, it's like not all flour is the same. Some is fluffy, some are more dense, therefore causing the roll to be either more bigger or smaller, and what I noticed is based on like the color of our ash, when we're ashing it or we're smoking and it gets to the point where, the deposit, I've noticed some of our more of the organic being more of a gray, not a super white paste type, color, and it's, and then like what the flavor, organics giving you more, I feel like more terpene, more flavor, more, just a little bit more than what you would get with a salt-based program, I'm not gonna lie, I don't know which brands. Some of my brands probably are working with synganic, so I couldn't even touch on that subject, but yeah.
Thank you for the question, Jack. I mean, that's clearly the direction that we're heading, right? Bringing the best of outdoor cultivating indoors and commercializing it so we can turn up the terps, get the trace mineral counts back up, ensure that we do have all the 102 total potential trace minerals, which is, again, we're going to talk a little bit deeper about this and later. We're not just bringing out the terps. There's esters, there's thiols, there's all these different things that we're not even measuring at the lab level. So when you're incorporating all these biostimulants and organic inputs, it's not even coming up on the test results. So you might even have a lower terpene result. And all these other things are popping up, but we're not even measuring it yet. So that's the fascinating part around where we're at today and what this whole Synganics movement is creating. So great question, Jack. Thank you. And by the way, the CCI book, everybody that's asking a question is going to be getting a raffle ticket from Jack, and we're giving away some of the CCI books. The CCI Black Book, Cultivation 101 at the highest level. It's pretty dope. So Jack has spent years on this book, putting it together with a lot of the killers that we all know. And it's honestly, if you're a commercial cultivator, this is a black book that you can utilize for SOPs and strategies. There's a lot of compilations in there, so we are raffling 5 of those off tonight. So if you're asking questions, be engaged, you're getting a raffle ticket, and we're gonna give 2 away after this panel, and then we'll do 3 later after the 7:30 panel. So thank you, Jack, appreciate you, man. What other questions do we have amongst each other? Oh, we have another question down here. Hi. Sure. So the question was, what's the perspective of having specific genetic recipes or cultivar recipes by water activity, right? I would love to start this one because that's exactly what we're doing. Every cultivar has, by the time we're in the bins and the flowers buck down, we are measuring water activity every single day by cultivar. So we know we're going to start to track and measure and having a baseline. So that's a great question. So my short answer is yes. Anybody else?
I've noticed that some weed ages better than other weed, and I'm guessing that is because of water content, perhaps? Because I know this one strain we have, Fugazi, it doesn't age well, it ages quick. You want to get it more on the fresh side. And then Triple Lindy, Blueprint, that thing ages like fine wine. You store it, right? Like, it's crazy. You almost want to let it sit for a month, which is ludicrous in my world, you know what I mean? And I don't know, who can weigh in on that? It's a question on a question. You got me, Doc?
Yeah. No, I agree with that. So longevity, I think, has a lot to do with the moisture content. Because the higher the moisture content, the more those enzymes and non-enzymatic activity can continue to happen. But if you're a cultivator and you're growing in the masses and you know your quality can be pretty much the same between 0.67 and 0.55, quality is similar. Well, if you correlate that to moisture content, your cultivators, you're selling water weight to some extent. So the difference between 0.55 and 0.67 could be, depending on how big your grow is, could be thousands and thousands of dollars. So having that honed in to the T, not letting down quality, but understanding commercially, if I get 1% more per pound and I'm selling 100,000 pounds a year, that equates to a lot of money.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, we're absolutely, like we had in the double stack room, we actually had over 17% dry to wet weight ratio on one run. And we were like, holy crap, like, how did we get there? Well, we were measuring every day. We knew exactly when we wanted to start trimming it and then sealing it up. So, I mean, that's just absolutely.
Don't let your weight go.
You're literally letting money just dry out. And so as we start to refine the process and making sure, and JP, I agree with you, man, there's definitely certain terpene pairings, like limonene and caryophyllene, like the OG profile, like a lot of the gas strains definitely age well. But something like, I don't know, the glitter bomb, for example, that thing aged out quick. Like the terps just dissipated within like a few weeks. And it really converted from like a nice blueberry terp, and then it went into like a really funky perfume, and then it just got a little weird after that. So
I've also noticed like those are the greasier strains. Like they just look and feel greasy. They break down greasy, and I've heard my cultivation partners say that the leaves are like leathery and have like a shine to them on those type of strains we're talking about that tend to age faster. I have no idea what any of that means, but that's.
This is getting, I don't know all this for a fact because I don't have data on flower to back it up, but it's well understood in food and pharma that water activity levels will impact lipid oxidation, so how fast things go rancid, and also browning reactions. So I've heard that before, that some like oily strains, they just oxidate, like they go not rancid, maybe it is rancid.
They just turn quick.
Oxidation happens really fast. They start to break down. So I don't have a ton of data to say you can fix it by doing this. But in theory, if it behaves like, water activity will determine the rate of a lot of chemical reactions. So maybe that's something you could play with.
That's a great question. Thank you. What other questions do we have? Yes, sir. So the question was, does chlorophyll impact the terps and the taste of overall the flower itself based on water activity, the correlation between the two?
I don't know if I could say chlorophyll relates to terpenes. It could mask terpenes. We still got a lot to figure out here, right? So in tobacco, the reason the leaves look yellow, you've seen pictures of them hanging in the barn and they look yellow. That's because it's a forceful removal of chlorophyll. They go from green to yellow. But the difference is in tobacco, they're at like 160 degrees, and so they're cooking them, but they don't have terpenes to worry about. So, at least in my personal studies, and this has been backed up by a lab out of Canada, chlorophyll does degrade when you're drying and curing cannabis, but not to the rate of tobacco. And so next week, when I get home, I've done an 8-week project looking at different ways of drying and curing where I'm looking at the chlorophyll breakdown, I'm looking at the carbohydrate breakdown. So, if any of you have ever smoked a nicotine vape, right, it's sweet and it's amazing and it's addictive for a reason. It tastes awesome. Well, in cannabis, that's in tobacco as well. That's the purpose, is to break down those carbohydrates from being starches into more simple sugars because it tastes better. And so the extent of that change, I can't tell you today. Hopefully in a month I can. But all of those reactions, the breakdown of chlorophyll, the change of carbohydrates, all of those things happen at a higher water activity because you need water to make those things happen. And so it's interesting going along, hearing qualitative data of how growers are doing freaking awesome jobs, and then putting that data behind it and hopefully being able to say one day, maybe for the first week, making sure you're not going under, I'm shooting in the dark here, 0.7 water activity, because you want those reactions to happen as much as possible while considering that, microbial growth can happen at those higher. So, finding that happy balance of those happening is what, very soon I hope we can report and say. But I think there is a big part of chlorophyll that drives taste.
Great question. Thank you. I do want to be mindful of time. We got about 5 more minutes. If we want to wrap up, any final thoughts, any other questions from the audience? We got one question right here, sir. The question was, how does plant health correlate to long-term and shelf life, right? Okay, so from the whole Synganic approach, right, what we're doing is improving plant health and immunity, which does translate to more resin production, right? So as we start to produce more resin, that flower itself is starting to have more things to synthesize, so it's got more to hold on to. So when you start going through the dry cure process, that is improving shelf life, right? You have a healthier plant, you got a thicker cellular wall structure throughout the cultivation. You start to come and chop it at that day, it's healthy, right? So I believe that you're actually giving it more chance to survive throughout that dry cure process. And yes, we smoked a pack that was maybe 5 months old. And shout out to Turpy Lock, because those Turkey Locks bags are sick. Yes, and it's still smoked. So I do believe that just a typical salt pack does not last that long. But when you start to incorporate a lot of these biologicals and organic inputs, absolutely, from my perspective.
I think that's a hard question. I think there's a few ways to look at it, right? You've got plant health, you've got your 16 essential nutrients that the plants need, right? And it needs those nutrients to grow and to produce this yield. But it gets tricky when we're talking about terpenes and secondary metabolite production, because you can have a weak little plant and it be attacked by an insect, and that plant's going to put everything in its power to push out the most secondary metabolites it can to protect itself. And so just because, just for example, its terpenes skyrocket, that doesn't mean in a commercial space that's going to be a good plant, right? Because your yield's going to be terrible, even though maybe your terpene production goes up a little bit, because it's just a plant trying to protect itself. So I think we kind of have to look at it in a few different ways. Yield is boosted by having the proper nutrients and having sunlight. That's going to build your yield. And so where terpenes get interesting is, like the synganic movement, is having those other pieces, working in there with the plant's metabolism to boost secondary metabolite production, which is separate than yield of plant material.
Controlled stress, right?
Yeah.
That was a tough question, and thank you for asking that. There's so much to unpack on this whole idea of like the SARS response and just really controlling the stress of that plant to create more terps, and what does that do to flavor overall and just the overall shelf life. Yes, I'm here for it. I want to learn more, so thank you. We got time for one more question. Anybody like to chime in? Any questions from our panelists?
What's the best tasting form of smoke, right? Hash, whatever you could put into it, what is the best?
Well, that's a tricky one, because, I like to dab, and I like to smoke flower, but I like to smoke hash holes. So it's very hard, because everything burns at different temperatures. I hit my dabs at different temperatures. Sometimes I'm taking it at a low temp. Sometimes I'm taking it hot, just varies how I'm feeling. Different effects. I get more high when I hit it at a hotter temperature, but therefore I'm putting more concentrates. Like instead of a 0.1 or 0.2, I'm doing like a 0.5 or something. At a higher temperature, like 600 degrees. So it just varies. It's like me. I love Skittles. It's fire. But then there's also different flavors in flower forms that I like more. So,
It's a hard question.
Yeah.
Allison, question for you. What are some of the collaborative efforts that you'd like to explore to get more of the subjective, curation style into more quantitative studies?
Yeah, so I think I would like to have more information of how people are drying and curing, right, on a commercial level. I got a solid handle of it, but from people that are, curating thousands of pounds, right, large amounts of pounds. Like, how are you putting your quality point on that? That is extremely interesting to me, to be able to follow that back and say, all right, well, of course it starts with a healthy plant. Of course it starts with what that plant produces when it's wet, but then at that time where you're killing the plant and putting it into that position through drying, understanding that completely and being able to pair science with extreme quality that we have today. That is interesting to me. Also working with hash makers and being able to wrap my head around what makes a quality strain that produces hash is super interesting to me. I've been doing a lot of microscopy work and understanding, how the head comes off the trichome and how that happens over time and as water activity goes down. But not only that, but by variety and how they behave. The cuticle strength itself. And how that is, and what equates to a nice wash. I think we can put the science behind that, and we have the tools to do that now. So, being able to talk to folks like yourselves that have a handle on the quality, I want to get with you and try to put some numbers behind that.
Absolutely.
Those are great And I think we can absolutely help you with that. I mean, the hash community is fascinating. You know, a lot of these washers are unicorns because they wash really well, and they got great transfer of flavor. They have great stability and overall. So the weak neck trichome trait, like that itself is fascinating. And can you know, how do you breed for that? Because again, these are such unicorn phenotypes that have been selected. The genotype of that weak neck trait, it's like, how do we get more of those, right? This has been an amazing discussion, guys.
Yeah,
I
good
appreciate
time.
that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Round of applause for our panelists, please. The science of flavors continues. We're going to be coming back at 7:45 for our second panel, but I want to thank each of you guys for coming on here. Appreciate your perspective.
Thank you for letting us come up here.
Yeah, thanks
Big
for
up the
having us.
CoNNect.
Thanks, Sergey.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you.